And the next thing I know, I'm floating up, up, up into the most beautiful, bright, white light. And when I reached this site, I was immersed in this tremendous force of love that permeated every cell of my body. And this love, it just enveloped me and became me as we merged into one. And as I was in this light, then it's like this peace and tranquility just was all around me, and I became very peaceful. And I was no longer in pain. I was free of pain. I was free of my body. I was free of all earthly cares. But when I was in this light, this space, I recognized where I was, and I recognized this being of light. I was with my Creator. I was with my Father in heaven, and I was home. So I immediately understood that God was in everything, and there wasn't anything that was not of God.
Okay, we're here with Mary Grace. She is a spiritual counselor, a parapsychologist, sociologist, psychologist, medium, and author. She has also had an amazing near-death experience and also an after-death visitation from her mother, among other spiritual transformative experiences, even a meeting with God. So welcome, Mary. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my passion for the paranormal, AJ.
Well, I would like to begin with your near-death story.
It starts on when I hit bottom in life. And I'm sure a lot of people know what that's like when you hit bottom. And for me, the bottom was I was very sick with two incurable illnesses, lupus and epilepsy. And the effects of that just made me extremely tired and sick all the time. I slept a lot. And I also had a hole in my heart. And so physically, I was alive, but I wasn't living. And I was dying, but I wasn't dead. I felt like I was in limbo. And mentally, I was grieving the loss of my mother. And I was also on, because of the illnesses and the depression, I was on 24 different medications, and I saw 5 doctors on a regular basis. And one day I just, and to cope with it all, I was also addicted to alcohol and drugs. So to cope with it all, I just took more alcohol and more drugs. And that was my life. A lot of drugs, a lot of alcohol, illegal and legal. So one day, it was November 1st, All Saints Day. I just had enough. I hit bottom, and I knew I had to do something. And the only thing I could think of to do was to drive to the cemetery to be near my mom and to pray. So on that chilly November night, I got on I got on my knees on my mother's grave, and I just begged God to take me home. And I just got very angry at God. I'm like, God, why have you abandoned me? Why have you left me in this state of limbo? Why have I been cursed with all these illnesses and addictions, and why me? Why me? And I even said to God, I said, make up your mind. I'm yelling at God, make up your mind. Shit or get off the pot, God. You either heal me or you take me home. Have you no mercy? Have you no mercy, compassion? And then after I got mad at God, I moved into making a deal with God. I'm sure most people know what that's like. You make a deal with God. Okay, God, give me a sign that you haven't abandoned me, and I will. I didn't know what at first. I know I'll quit drinking. That's what I'll do. I'll quit drinking. But if I get no sign, then screw you, God. All bets are off. I'll just drink myself to death. Only I didn't say screw. I actually said the F-U word, and I still can't believe I said that to God, but I did. And just after hours of what seemed like just talking to myself and sobbing and crying and getting no response, I just felt defeated and I went home. Well, the next day, I got my sign from God. The next day, I got up and I decided that I was going to drive to the city. I live about 45 minutes south of Rochester, New York, in the country. And I was going to drive to the city because I wanted to get the latest book by John Edward one last time. And while I was there, I would get more drugs and alcohol. So I drove to the city and I purchased a bag of cocaine and I put it in the console of my car. And then I drove by to the nearest liquor store and I got a bottle of whiskey and I stuck it under the front seat of my car. And then I hopped on what's called 390 Expressway that goes around Rochester. And while I was driving on 390, that's when I got my sign from God. Now, many people know what it's like when you hear the words, you hear a song on the radio or in church, and the very words to that song are the message and very specific message and what you needed to hear at that precise moment in your life. Well, that's what happened to me. I was listening to this song came on the radio that I hadn't heard in probably about 20 years. And it was by the rock group called The Styx. And the song that came pouring out of the radio was Why Me? That was the name of the song, Why Me? And the words that spoke to my broken soul were these. The very couple end of the sentences are, and nothing seems to fit. Things don't go your way. You know you've had enough. You've had the right to say, why me? Why me? And I knew in that instant, that was my sign from God, because this was the very words and everything, the words summed up everything that I was experiencing in the cemetery the night before. So I hear these words, I'm sobbing, I start crying, thank you, God, for not abandoning me. And then at the same exact time, I feel a bolt of electricity. I feel like this electrical charge go through my entire body. Now, the strange thing is there was no pain, but I felt like I was struck by the proverbial lightning bolt of God. But I didn't know what was going on. It was only later on, months later, that I learned that what was most likely happening in that instant is that I was having cardiac arrest. But I didn't know and I didn't care. I was just so happy that I got my sign from God. And I'm driving my car and I'm sobbing, thank you, God, thank you, God. And I was right near the exit for the bookstore, Borders bookstore. Y'all know her well. Used to, I loved her. And I got to the bookstore parking lot. I drove off the expressway. I pulled into the parking lot. And I noticed on my clock that it was 5:15 p.m. So I shut off my car and I just leaned my head back against the headrest. And I'm like, I'm still crying. Thank you, God. Thank you. Thank you for not abandoning me. Thank you for your sign. And the next thing I know, I'm floating up, up, up into the most beautiful, bright, white light. And when I reached this site, I was immersed in this tremendous force of love that permeated every cell of my body. And this love, it just enveloped me and became me as we merged into one. And this amount of devotion was a million times more intense than anything I ever experienced on earth. And as I was in this light, then it's like this peace and tranquility just was all around me, and I became very peaceful, and I was no longer in pain. I was free of pain. I was free of my body. I was free of all earthly cares. And I just relaxed and surrendered to this light that was now, I understood that I was there to rest and heal in this light. And nothing else mattered. Everything was going to be all right. But when I was in this light, this space, I recognized where I was, and I recognized this being of light. I was with my Creator. I was with my Father in heaven, and I was home. And when I was in this place, I just knew that this condemnation and punishment were just concepts that did not and could not exist in this all-encompassing light. Any sins I had ever committed were already forgiven. This was not anything the light cared about. And then I moved into what's commonly known as the life review. I'm not going to get into all details of that, but the most important thing is I was shown scenes of my life and times when people hurt me or I felt wronged. I understood that they were only there to help me on my spiritual progression and help me with my growth, and things that my illnesses and any injuries were to help make me stronger. So I understood that everything has a purpose. Everything in my life had a purpose, and it all made sense. And then after that life review, I was back in the light, and without any spoken words, God communicated to me. He said, I gave you everything that you asked for. I gave you a sign that I have not abandoned you, and I brought you back home. You cannot stay, however. Your work is not yet finished. And in response, I was okay with that decision. I just knew that it was the right thing to do, that I needed to go back. At the same time, I would have promised anything and all that light and love that I was within. And with that thought that I was okay with that decision, I felt myself being pulled backward from the light. I felt I was being pulled backwards. And the next thing I know, I'm sitting in my car in the parking lot of Borders bookstore. And as I tried to process what happened, I was in this state of euphoria that was I was in such an incredible high that was not like any high I had ever gotten before. And ironically, I said out loud, what the hell just happened to me? Well, apparently heaven had happened to me. I didn't realize it at that then. And then as reality started sinking in, I'm sitting in my car and I'm trying to process what happened and think about everything. And then I remembered about a promise I made the day before, the deal I made with God. And I reached into the console of my car and I got out the bag of cocaine and I reached underneath the front seat of my car and I got out the bottle of whiskey and I'm looking at these things and I'm thinking to myself, this is not going to be easy. But at the same time, suddenly these things didn't mean anything to me. They were like penny candy. They just absolutely meant nothing to me anymore because the high I was on at that moment was so much incredibly better. And then I sat there for a while and I was kind of processing everything. And I like, well, I checked myself over. I think I'm okay. I might as well go into the bookstore and get the book that I drove all the way to the city for. So I opened the car door and I stepped into the parking lot. And when I stepped into the parking lot, it didn't take me long to realize the world that I stepped into was not the same one I had left 45 minutes earlier. And the first thing that I noticed is I walked across, as I was walking across the parking lot to the bookstore, I felt like I was floating. It's like I was floating. And I walked into the bookstore and I'm looking at all the other people in there, engrossed in their books and searching for books. And I'm looking at them and I was just overcome with this sense of love for them. And I just wanted to go up to each person and just hug them and tell them, don't you know how much God loves you? Everything's going to be all right. Everything's going to be all right. Well, fortunately, I restrained myself from doing that and I got the book and I got out of there. But it was only after time that I realized how much my life had changed the day I saw the light. So the first thing I noticed, in the days after this happened is my heart just overflowed with this level of love that wasn't human. It just wasn't human. If I was in the city and I saw a homeless person on the street, I love that homeless person as much as I love my own husband. And the birds and the trees and the animals, I love them just as much as I love my own family and friends. So I immediately understood that God was in everything, and there wasn't anything that was not of God. And I had this experience, also known as kind of a unitive experience, and that I felt at one with everything. And as I felt one with everything, I found out that I could merge with anything that I put my attention on. For example, I could focus my attention on every time I bent down to smell a flower, I could focus my attention on the flower and I became one with it and I could feel God's presence and it would always bring tears to my eyes. I would cry just at smelling a flower. And I found out that I could merge with anything I focused on. So I would walk to like the lake. I started having all this, the other after effect is I started having all this energy. Like before I could hardly get out of bed and walk far at all. And now I'm walking 2 miles to the lake every day. I was walking my dogs there. And I get to the lake and I notice like when the eagle was flying overhead, I found that I could, physical laws no longer applied to me. I could leave my body at will and merge with the eagle and feel what it was like to like just fly over the lake and on a breeze and even catch a thermal. And I could focus my attention on the geese that were floating on the lake. And I could feel what it was like to bob up and down on the waves. So I spent all my time just being and being different things. Like one of the things I like to do is you take those milkweed seed pods when I was walking around in the woods or the fields, and you can split them open and there's these little white seeds inside. And I would just like scatter them to the wind, and I could merge with the seeds to feel what it was like to float on a breeze. And one of the things that I like to do is merge in the wintertime is I could merge with a snowflake. I like to merge with a snowflake, and then I could feel what it was like to gently fall to the ground with a sense of peace and joy. Now, who knew that snowflakes were joyful? But they are. They're very joyful. And why wouldn't they be? You know, they're of God too. God's in every snowflake. So as I was spending all this time with God and meditation and prayer, my relationship was becoming stronger and stronger and stronger. And I was not only possessed, I was obsessed with God, you know, because I could feel this presence inside me. I could feel and love so much that my heart hurt. There was a pain in my chest that I loved so much. And I always felt like that movie, The Alien, where the creature comes out, bursting out of the guy's chest. And I felt like, oh no, this is going to happen to me, because it came very clear to me that the human body was not meant to take such a force. It just wasn't. So as my relationship with God became stronger, one day I had this epiphany. It's kind of funny, but I thought, well, if God is in me, he must be in everyone else too. Well, they didn't teach me this in religious education growing up. No, they taught me that God was separate from me. He was in heaven. And the only way to be with him was to obey all the church rules. And then when I died, if I'm lucky, I would get to meet him. So now all of a sudden, my religion isn't making sense to me at all. And then, of course, my new expanded consciousness, my psychic abilities increased. And I found that I can talk with, my family and friends in heaven, spirits, angels, guardian angels, and Jesus, whoever I wanted to. It was just like talking with someone in a grocery store. So, of course, I stayed in touch with my mom. I would talk to mom, and so this became my normal life. And like I said, my energy started going through the roof, and I was feeling healthy for the first time in like 20 years. And right after my near-death experience, right after that day, I stopped having seizures. I had all this energy, and I hardly ate, because it's like I never got hungry. I just felt like I was like when you're on amphetamines and you don't get hungry at all. So I decided I wanted to find out exactly what happened to me on that day when I was in the car Borders parking lot. So I went to all 5 of my doctors and I got all checked out. I had a new EEG done of my brainwaves, a new EKG done on my heart, and I had new blood levels of anti-nuclear antibodies, which are the blood tests for lupus. And when they did an ultrasound on my heart, the hole was gone in my heart. All my tests came back negative, and even the hole was gone in my heart. I have been completely healed of 2 incurable illnesses, lupus and epilepsy. And also I kept my deal with God, and I quit drinking. I mean, I no longer addicted to drugs and alcohol. No, now it's like, okay, celebration of birthday, maybe have one cocktail on special occasions, but my life no longer revolves around drug and alcohol. So I had those miracles happen to me. But on the downside, the integration into this world, a different level of reality, was lengthy, difficult. It was like being on an emotional roller coaster. And I like the phrase you used, AJ, in your book, suffering transformation. I think it was suffering to transformation. I never thought about it that way, but it was very difficult. So as long as I was in nature and I was with God and I was in prayer and meditation, I was just in a state of bliss. I was happy as a clam. But as soon as I had to play the role of wife or mother or, psychologist, I just didn't want to participate. Wasn't really that interested in this life. So as a result, things like doing the laundry, the dishes, cleaning the house, paying the bills, not my priority anymore. No, much to the chagrin of my husband. So those things just kind of fell by the wayside. And I had to, I was just happier just to be out with God and nature and praying. And another integration thing that was difficult was eating. Eating became torture for me because it's hard to eat something that you feel at one with. It felt like cannibalism. Like for me, just even like the first time maybe I tried to look at a hamburger and I see a hamburger, I see the two big brown eyes of a cow. That's what I see. So as a result, but even the bread, even I eat a piece of wheat bread, it was like I was fully aware that that stalk of wheat gave its life in order for me to live. And I hated that something had to die in order for me to live. And it kind of bothered me. So I just, I said, I'll just give up eating meat because that eliminates a whole food group. So that was one thing I did. And eventually I became a basket case. I knew I needed help. And I didn't know who to go to. I'm in the mental health field. I knew if I went to one of my colleagues, psychologists, they'd probably, or any therapist, they'd probably put me on medication and suggest 30 days and psychiatric. But this wasn't a medical issue. This was a God issue. Who would I go to? So I went to the one person I thought would understand. I went to my priest. And I told him all that happened to me, and I was talking to Mom and Jesus and all these things. And he listened quite patiently. And at the end of it, he said, he became very stern. And he's like, don't you realize that what you're doing is dabbling with the devil? And don't you realize it's against church laws to communicate with the dead? And I'm like, well, I was talking with my mom. You know my mom, she came to church every Sunday. She was a devout Catholic. So this, it was really, I went home just sobbing because he had told me, he says, I think you need to find another church. And eventually, now this part about the priest is not my latest book. It's in my first book. It's the reason I wrote it. Because eventually I was legally excommunicated from my Catholic church for communicating with my loved ones on the other side. And I didn't understand if God could love me and accept me, why couldn't my own religion? So then I spent the next 10 years writing and doing research on a book, what I call Spirit Communication for Catholics, using the church doctrine known as the Communion of Saints. I had this burning question. If we can talk to God and the saints in heaven, why can't we talk to Grandma? Or Uncle Joe? What's up with that? Well, I found out that we could through the Communion of Saints. You call it that. You just don't call it spiritualism. It's all the words that you use. Because as Catholics, we talk to dead all the time. We even have a rosary for Mother Mary. So that's why I wrote my first book, because I knew there was injustice and I just wanted to help other people that were going through a difficult time. And I started my own counseling service to help other people that were having paranormal, supernatural, mystical, and near-death experiences. And it kind of became my mission. And eventually I did receive the help that I did need from, I learned from my research what I needed was a transpersonal psychologist, and I found one in my area, and she was very helpful. One of the things that I had a hard time was I love gardening, and I would weed the garden. You know, you have to weed the garden. And I said to my therapist, I says, I can't weed the garden. I can't kill anything because of this experience I had. I can't even kill an ant. So how can I kill a weed in my garden? And she simply says to me, are you afraid to die? And I said, no, of course not. I'm just looking forward to going back. I just can't wait till I, die again. And she says, well, what makes you think those weeds are afraid to die? It's just a circle of life. And I thought, wow, I never thought about it that way. So I went home and started happily weeding my garden. But, yes. And to get to your question, AJ, I didn't know what happened to me for a long time. I really didn't understand it. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't even tell my husband. I couldn't. I tried to tell him, and he just didn't really understand or believe me. Or, sometimes when you're hit with another reality, it's hard for the person who experiences it, much less trying to tell somebody else about it. So yeah, it took me a long, long time to process it. My first book, Talking to God and Grandma, like I said, was 10 years research and writing, and that became my therapy. And for that whole time I was doing research and writing, I really didn't share my experience that much. I did a couple IANS meetings, and then after the book came out, I started to do so more. And then I just finished writing my second book, Breakfast with Bluebirds, and in that I also share my near-death experience, but also a lot of stories. I wrote that book because to help, and like with the counseling I do, is to help people that are going through challenging times. And we're all going through challenging times some point in our life. So for many years, I sent out a newsletter, and I would write these inspirational short stories to people on my email list. And a couple of years ago, it's been about 2 years in the process now, I decided to just put all the stories together just to have them as a collection, maybe as an heirloom, for family heirloom for my stories. And I decided to publish them. And they're all stories from my personal experience. The short of it is, I call it, it's kind of like a paranormal chicken soup for the soul, is a way to describe it. A shout out to Jack Canfield. So, because they're all true stories that happened to me, stories about angels and miracles and lessons in life that I learned from nature, like bluebirds and fireflies and aliens and even football. So I write a couple stories about how I've been inspired by the Buffalo Bills, and big Bills fans in our area. So I wrote 2 stories about how the Bills are more than just a football team. They're an inspiration to people worldwide who, still have that hope. People that gather together every week and share, family and the Bills, or you could substitute any football team, but you get together with your family and friends for shared vision and hope. And the lessons they learn from there is that, life is like an arduous football game. It's full of penalties and drop kicks and injuries, but you just have to get up again and again and again to keep going head on into that line. But you always have your backers. You always have support from from your team, your people on the other side, your angels and guides, from your family and friends. So, yeah, and that's kind of sums up that a little bit. And he said the book is for anyone going through a challenging time, and it's to bring hope and inspiration. And there's a lot of funny stories in there too. Stories about growing up in a haunted house, and stories about some of my pets. And did you want me to share the after-death communication, AJ? You know how much time we have here.
Okay, let me ask you, and then you can answer, okay?
Okay.
I'm aware that you had an after-death visitation from your mother, right?
Yes,
Can you tell us about it?
sure. So one night I was sleeping in bed, and this was about 2 months after my mom had died. And in this dreamlike state, I found myself in the bedroom and back in my house where I grew up. And I was surrounded by all these boxes. And I understood these boxes contained my mother's belongings, and they had all been packed up after the funeral. And as I'm standing in the bedroom, all of a sudden I see this woman who looks like my mother reach down into one of the boxes, and she pulled out two lit candles, a white one and a blue one, and she handed them to me. And I thought to myself, well, that can't be mom because she's died. So I turned around to set the candles on the dresser, and I thought, well, I'll just blink my eyes a couple times, and when I turn around, she'll be gone, because obviously it's a hallucination. So I turned around, and there my mother remained. And she looked so young and beautiful, not at all the way she looked when she passed from cancer. And then my next response, my next thing I did was I scolded my mother. I said, Mom, where have you been? I've been waiting and waiting to get a sign from you. And she simply smiled and said, I'm here for you now, Mary. And with that, I just threw my arms around her and I hugged her, and we hugged each other so close and tight. And the next thing I know, she was rocking me. I'm sitting in her lap, like in a rocking chair, and she's rocking me, and she's stroking my hair, and she's saying over and over again, everything's going to be all right. Everything's going to be all right. Now, in hindsight, I thought, how odd to have it then be a 40-year-old woman sitting in her mother's lap, right? But at that time in my life, I felt more like a 4-year-old little girl who needed her mother. And she was there for me to hold me and console me from beyond the grave. And then next thing I know, I am back in my bed and I'm sobbing, tears of joy, tears of relief, tears of grief. I'm just sobbing. And I wake up, my husband who's next to me. He's like, what's wrong? What's wrong? And I'm like, it's Mom. I can still feel her presence around me. It's Mom. It's Mom. She was here. She's just here. She's alive. She's alive. Oh my God. Mom is not dead. Now, it's one thing to be raised believing in heaven, life after death. It's quite another thing to experience it, because the day Mom came in what is known as a visitation, it changed my life completely. And because I knew that I would never again be separated from my mom. Physically, we were separated, but emotionally, psychically, psychologically, we would always be together, and she would always be there for me.
Did this happen after or before your NDE?
This actually happened before it. Yeah. Yeah. My NDE was like, that was in March, and no, it was in May. It's about the same time in this Secret Garden story. It was like 2 months after she died, and then I died like a year later.
Another question. These after effects, did they gradually fade, or do you still have them as intense as before? Or tell me about these after effects.
They're pretty much still with me. You know, it's like once your consciousness expands, I like the
Are you still
reality.
able to merge with everything?
Yeah,
With the
I like
snowflake?
kind of the term that my friend Richard Dolan uses. Once the toothpaste is out of the tube, you can't put it back in. You know, it's like you're connected to everything, and it extremely changes your life. Especially the thing I like to say, especially the life review. That was probably the most profound effect on my life, because you think about it, whenever somebody harms you or an injustice has been done to you or whatever it is, it's like you know it's for your own good, and you can't say anything, because if you do, it's going to come back to you in your life review. So revenge and things like that, just you have to let everything go, because if it doesn't, you know it's going to come back to you in a life review. And at the same token, I know people that will have hurt me or done things mean, they're going to get their karma when they have their life review, and it's not going to be pretty. So there's like this kind of spiritual justice, you could say. But it really helps you to see things differently, because when people are angry or mean, you understand God still loves them as much as they love you. You know, he loves everyone. And when someone's going through a hard time, they're angry or for whatever reason, going through drug addiction, alcoholism. I was there, you know. That person needs help. I just pray for them, you know, basically. Oh,
In
I
your
think
new
you're,
book, okay, in your new book, Breakfast with Bluebirds, there's a story called UFOs over the Finger Lakes. There, you mention a bright orange ball of light that you saw, and after that, you started believing in aliens, right? Can you tell us more or less what happened and your beliefs regarding aliens and UFOs?
well, that wasn't my first experience. My first memorable experience when I was about 8 years old with the whole family. We were out coming back from somewhere. We were on a country road, and we saw these lights in the sky. We didn't know what they were. And my father was in the Army Air Corps, and he was a pilot, so he knew the difference between, you know, planes and flares or whatever. And he's also like a big photographer, amateur photographer. So he pulls over the side of the road, and we're looking at him, and he took pictures of them. And at first there was one, and then it split off into two. So he's got several pictures where there's one and then two. And these pictures he sent them into the newspaper, and they made it into the Rochester newspaper. There's a big, huge story on it. It was kind of funny. And then at the end of the story, they said, well, the family was told it was just flares. Okay. But that had a profound effect on my life. That was a paranormal experience that always had that interest. But between that and growing up in a haunted house, I think paranormal was my life. And then, but the story, Finger Lakes over the UFOs over the Finger Lakes, it was an experience just driving on a back road one night, 11 o'clock at night, Merrillback Road over Hemlock Lake, leaving a friend's house. And I just saw this bright orange ball of light. And it looked exactly like this, when the sun sets and you get that beautiful orange ball. So whenever I see the sunset now, I jokingly call it the UFO sun, because this was that orange ball of light, but this was 11:30 at night. And so I'm driving down this back road. There's nobody in sight. It's in the middle of nowhere. And I see this immediately. It's okay, it's a UFO. And I'm staring at it driving. And I was just, while I was driving, I'm praying. I'm like, please, God, please, angels and guide, protect me. I really don't feel like being abducted tonight. And I'm saying these things, like kind of half jokingly and half serious. And I'm like, so I stopped when I got to an intersection. I stopped the car and I pulled over, and I had the window down, and because it was a nice summer night, and it was dead quiet. There was no peepers, there was no cricket, there was no animal sounds. It was just dead quiet. The only thing I could hear is like the humming of my car engine. And I'm staring at this thing. It's just above the trees, the left side of the road, and maybe a couple of 100 yards in front of me. And as I'm staring at this, before it went away, I stop and call my husband. So I call my husband and I'm like, I get his voicemail. If I'm home late tonight, it's probably because the UFO I'm staring at right now. Just wanted to let you know. Hang up the phone. And then there's this whole mystery of why people don't take pictures. You have your cell phone. There's this whole phenomenon that people don't take pictures when they have a close encounter. And I never thought to take a picture because they get in your head and they tell you no pictures. So never took a picture. And then this thing just kind of faded away. It didn't shoot off, it didn't take off, it just kind of faded away and disappeared. And yeah, and I talk in the story about the Finger Lakes, Western New York is a hot spot for UFOs. I live near two of them, Hemlock and Candice Lake, which I was told people see UFOs coming in and out of lakes all the time, especially the Finger Lakes. And yeah, so I kind of had the belief in aliens and the experience since I was a little kid. It just grew. And then in about 5 years ago, it was before COVID, I ended up starting my own UFO group, the Finger Lakes in Western New York, the Finger Lakes UFO and Paranormal Meetup. Just to meet with other like-minded people, because it's hard when you live in the country to I would go to Rochester, to the Rochester UFO group, and that's where I met Richard Dolan, and we became friends. So I would go there all the time. And in fact, he graciously endorsed my Breakfast with Bluebirds book. But yeah, so the only way I thought to get people together in the country was to start something. And so just put an ad in the paper, and you want to join a UFO, or, share your UFO experience. Had the first meeting at a local community center, this old school building, and like 80 people showed up. It was like, whoa, these people are coming out of the hills. And it was like 3 hours of people just sharing their stories hour after hour. It's like, wow, I didn't even know them. And now we've been going, we stopped for COVID, and we've been going the last, since then, 3-4 years strong. Only now we meet in Livonia. So yeah.
Where can people buy your books, and can you show them or mention the titles?
Yeah, I'll show you the first book I talked about. This was the one I call it Spirit Communication for Catholics. And it teaches people, it's for anyone that wants to learn how to communicate with spirit. But this was specifically for Catholics and how you can use this. I don't know if you can see that. Can you see that? Yeah. How you can use the church doctrine on the communion of saints to communicate with your family and friends and husband, in heaven, without it going against the teachings of the church. Like I said, it's just a matter of semantics. And
your new book.
and the new one is Breakfast with Bluebirds. And the title comes from one of the stories. I love bluebirds. They're called Eastern bluebirds, Eastern United States. And yeah, we've got 11 bluebird boxes on our property spread out over the acres. And every year I look forward to the bluebirds just showing up, and I have taught them kind of a Pavlovian technique. I whistle and feed them mealworms, and then they learn to come to this basket I hang on a tree. And I do want to say they're not bluebirds or not blue jays. A lot of people think of blue jays when I say bluebirds. Blue jays are the big ones. And bluebirds, I got to show you this. I can make the noise of a bluebird because my mother-in-law gave me this. So bluebirds have become my passion. And when I would start going every morning, and they don't eat out of feeders. They only eat live food. So I go to the bait shop and buy mealworms. So every morning I would take my coffee and my breakfast out to whatever, box they were at. And I have a perch nearby, and I put a basket there, and I would go out there and I'd whistle. I'd do this certain kind of whistle, and I'd put the mealworms in. So, then after a few days, they associate my presence with the food, and they see me and they come back, and then they eat the worms, and then I'll give them more, and I do this over and over. And over the years and all the time, it's also my time that while I'm watching the bluebirds, waiting for them to come, it's my meditation and prayer time. It's also my time with God, so I'm out there in nature and surrounded by all these beautiful trees and rose bushes, and other critters will come along and visit. And so my breakfast with bluebirds is also breakfast with God, and I spend time with my meditation and prayer. So that's how I like this story. It's actually the shortest story in the book. I think it's only 2 pages, but one of my favorites.
Yeah, that's a great explanation of the title of the book, Breakfast with Bluebirds. Okay, so I'm going to include the links in the description of this video. Please send me.
Yeah, by the way, they're available on Amazon in paperback and Kindle, and within a couple months, hopefully on Audible.
Perfect. So send me the links of your website if anybody wants to get hold of you or contact you. Where should they write, or how can they contact you?
Yeah, I have a website, www.giftsofgraceministry.org, and all my information is there, and my email and phone numbers. So that's the best way. And if you have a link, there'll be posted a link up there for my website. Yep. So
yes, I will. Well, thank you, Mary Grace. It was a pleasure having you, and I'm really glad we were able to share.
Well, thank you, AJ. Like I said, thank you for giving the opportunity. This has been a lot of fun. And yeah, and if you ever, want me back, I'm happy to talk. I have a lot of stories.
Great. Yes, I'll have you back.
This has been the AJ Parr Spiritual Journalist Podcast. Please like, share, and subscribe.